All right, so this week you are going to be doing your document analysis over World War One, and it will be the base of your primary source paper that you will do for the semester. That paper, I will put the instructions will be included when you get your graded copy back. So this week you will turn in a document analysis worksheet just like you ordinarily would. You will need to make sure that you have enough information included in it for it to look very similar to like an outline for a paper. So be very detailed with those this week. When you turn those in, I will have those graded by fairly early in the week, so that you have plenty of time to get your paper in. That will include all your due dates and everything. It'll be due toward the middle of April. So I mean it's nothing that's due. I mean you're still over a month out from the due date on that paper, and it's only 1,000 words. So just kind of hang with me on this. It'll be okay. So whenever you see that one sheet that's attached with your syllabus, the instructions on that just kind of change those dates up a little bit, but for the most part that'll all be there. I'll give you a grading rubric and everything and plenty of time so you know what to look for. But you will get that in next week's module. But this week, just worry about getting a good, hardcore, solid document analysis. Incorporate as much as you can from the lecture, from the videos, from everything that you have exposure to. So we're going to be looking at World War One. Now you should have just watched the video on how World War One starts. So we're going to look at kind of the United States viewpoint of this in these videos. So Woodrow Wilson in the 1912 election, he did not expect to win that election. He was Virginia born. He was a scholist. He had a very distinguished academic career. And I mean, he really, and we kind of talked about this last week. Basically the Bull Moose Party, or I'm sorry, not last week, but right before spring break, the Bull Moose Party ended up kind of just splitting the ticket and threw the election toward Woodrow Wilson. He was kind of a moderate progressive. A lot of people didn't think he was as progressive as he should have been. But one of the things that happens there is, I mean, World War One breaks out approximately 6 months after he is elected to president. And if we look at him being a moderate progressive, he had more pressing things in ways to look at. I mean, we're talking a war of a magnitude that hadn't been seen in the U.S. at that point. And so, but he does do some things, like especially if you look at the 19th Amendment, where women are given the right to vote. That really does kind of put him in that progressive category some. But Wilson's reaction to involving the U.S. in European conflicts defined his entire administration. And so he pledged to keep the United States out of this conflict. But there's a few things that happen. There's three primary things that we can look at that happen that causes the United States to get involved in World War One. But neutrality for the longest time was set to be his official standpoint on this. But one of the things we can look at is Lusitania. Now, the Lusitania happens very early in the war. She flew a British flag, and it was sank by a German U-boat, which is basically, it's a submarine. And she was sank in May 1915, and it caused the death of about 1,198 people. Had more than 100 citizens on board, and it sank very quickly off the Irish coast. And basically what happens is Wilson just demands of the Germans, look, don't do this again. And the problem with this is if you look at official, unofficial rules of the sea is that this is a passenger liner. The Germans should not have been shooting at it. But there were a lot of the Germans who thought that the U.S. was mobilizing weaponry and things like that to help the Europeans. And, the vast majority of the U.S. population, even after the Lusitania sank, really did support the president's determination to stay out of the war. And everybody knew that if the U.S. did enter, that they would enter on the side of England, France, and Russia. But his pledge to remain neutral helped him even secure the election of 1916. And basically, he ran on a campaign that was he kept us out of war. Primarily, that was his primary achievement during his first term in office. So with that, he was fairly easily reelected. But it doesn't take very long, and the Germans start what is called unrestricted submarine warfare. And the German government announced that it would sink any vessel on the high seas which were suspected of transporting material for war. So, and this would be regardless as to whether or not it flew a flag of neutrality. And this was a direct challenge to Wilson's promise to stay out of war. Now, the third most important thing that we can look at that did bring the United States into the war was the Zimmermann telegram. January 1917, there was a telegram intercepted by British agents, and it clearly indicated that Germany was attempting to recruit Mexico. And so what they're doing here is they're telling Mexico, look, if you will help us with this war, and if we can defeat the United States, we will give you back the land that you lost to the United States. And it's clearly indicating that Germany is now intervening in affairs that happen in the Western Hemisphere. Now, if you remember, Roosevelt basically made the United States the police of the Western Hemisphere. So this is a direct threat to the United States at this point. So Wilson asked Congress for a declaration of war, and that was approved April 1917. So the U.S. very quickly prepared to send troops. All right, so the U.S. did send their troops very quickly. I had to kind of cut a little spot out of there, so if that seems a little clunky, that's why. So they did send their troops, and those troops were known as doughboys to Europe, and it did bring the United States into a full patriotic swing. And they were convinced that the U.S. would bring a quick end to this war. And keep in mind, war was very exciting at this time. It was very much romanticized. Their mind of war was the splendid little war against Spain. And U.S. entry did bring the war to a swift end, but not for the reasons they thought it would. It wasn't so much a force thing, but it was more of a psychological thing. Before the U.S. entered the war, there was a very strong war sentiment in Germany. In 1915, the German government had promised its citizens that the war was not going to last any longer than 6 months. And instead, it had just kind of bogged down with neither side making much progress. The casualties at this point, by the time the U.S. enters the war, the casualties in Europe had mounted to an unbelievable height. As soon as the U.S. entered, German officers and government officials started discussing putting an end to the fighting. And so armistice was agreed for November 11th, 1918, at which time German Emperor Wilhelm II had to step down. And Germany prepared to create a democratic republic. We will pick up with peace negotiations in the next slide. But the one thing that I do want you to keep in mind is we tend to think about World War I and World War II being two completely separate wars. But I do want you to change your thinking as we move forward here. And I want you to start thinking about the two world wars being one war, just two parts with a big intermission in the center. So, because you are going to have all the same players, you are going to have lots of the same things going on. World War One directly is the cause for World War Two. And because of that, and we'll see this more as we move into World War II, but I want you to change your thinking on this and think about them as one more, just with a long intermission that you have part one and part two. So we'll pick up the next video to look at the peace negotiations at the end of this.